I'm Alan Sheptin. Excuse me, my company Sheptin Tutoring Group. I've been in Chappaqua. My office has been here for 6 years now, but I used to work out of my home in Katona. I established my company in 2007, but I've also been doing test prep for almost 30 years. So I've worked with probably well over 15 to 2,000 students on test prep alone. A little bit about me. I have a BA in mathematics from the University of Pennsylvania, an MBA from Fordham, so this is my second act doing consulting and test prep. I'm a member of NACAC, and I'm now a professional member of IECA. That's the Independent Educational Consultants Association. So we work with about 2,000 students through SAT and ACT prep. We work with kids not only in the New York area, but we work abroad. I have a client that I work with every summer in the United Kingdom that I go over there and do test prep with them. One of my students from there just got a 4-year full scholarship to Princeton, so we're really excited about that. And I speak a lot at not only schools, but religious organizations and local libraries. So first of all, also, if you have any questions, please type in and just let me know. So what I want to talk about are accommodations in general, the SAT and the ACT, kind of what are the differences between them and kind of what you need to know about the tests themselves, what tests will be the best fit for your child, how do you create a testing plan, and then look at the exam from the overall perspective of the application, because there's been a lot of interesting stuff going on with respect to the SAT and the ACT and a lot of test optional schools and things like that. Okay. So first of all, I want to talk about there's some testing myths, okay? East and West Coast colleges prefer the SAT or the ACT. As you start doing college visits with your student, you're going to find every school is going to say we don't care which one they take, as long as they take something if they need something. The ACT is easier than the SAT. They're very different exams, so that's not the case at all. The ACT is much more spitfire fast in terms of processing. The SAT gives the kids a little bit more time to kind of think and manipulate information. It's not possible to prepare for the ACT and SAT. That's what both organizations used to say, but what we're seeing is, first of all, the SAT is partnered with Khan Academy to create testing materials. The ACT is partnering with Kaplan to create testing materials. So again, the bottom line is students should be preparing for these tests. They should know kind of what the exam looks like and what it feels like. There are easy and hard ACT and SAT exams. Relatively speaking, there could be a few questions that look easier or harder, but the curve takes care of all that. So, the rumors, parents have said to me, students have said, I heard that the November test is always easier, the December test is really hard, but if you think about it, if you have 400,000 students taking a test in any administration, the curve takes care of itself, so you get a distribution of grades. Okay, testing accommodations. Let's talk about that first, get this out of the way. So these are sample accommodations, and there's basically anything under the sun can be accommodated. Extended time up to including triple time, okay? Separate location, multiple day testing, which means that your child will take the exam over more than 2 days, or at least 2 days rather. Stop the clock for students with ADHD. If they have that sort of accommodation at the building level, they will get it at the testing level as well. Large print booklets, okay, those are for kids that have low vision. A reader, a lot of times that's done for students with dyslexia. A scribe for a bubble sheet, same thing for a dyslexic or low vision student. Lamps instead of overhead lighting. Some kids get very distracted by the overhead lighting, depending on how the room is designed. Use of pens and highlighters. You're only supposed to use a number 2 pencil, but again, if it's a vision or processing issue and the student has that in their IEP or in their 504, again, the ACT and the SAT will make an effort to accommodate the student. Use of the computer for the writing portion is for a kid who has dysgraphia. Some kids also with dyslexia, they can use the computer, but everything has to be off other than the word processor. So, as I said, this is pretty comprehensive, okay? It doesn't mean that if your child is getting an accommodation at the building level, also you can go and say, well, now I want stop the clock. If they don't have that in their testing at school, they're not going to get it through the ACT. Okay, I want to first talk about what the ACT is all about. Any of you have older students who've taken the ACT or the SAT? Okay, a couple of you have already, so this might be, information you know already. So for those of you who don't have students at that level yet, it's good information to understand what the test is all about. The ACT is an exam that's based on 4 academic disciplines. Okay, written English, so grammar, contextual writing, mathematics, reading, and scientific reasoning, plus an optional essay at the end. What we're seeing is more and more schools are making this optional because it's almost forced piece of writing. So as you start looking at schools, what you should be doing is talking to the universities and seeing how they want the ACT to be designed. You could also look on their websites. You could also ask your guidance counselors in the building. It's administered by the American College Testing Program in Iowa City, Iowa. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s like I did and you took those Iowa tests, Iowa seems to be ground zero for testing, yes.
Do you recommend that students take the optional essay or not take the optional essay?
Again, it depends on what the universities are saying. We're seeing more and more schools are saying it's optional. I kind of say if you have a student who's learning different, the less you have to do, the better off. If your child is a really good writer and good thinker, it might be worth doing. It's a case-by-case basis, so yes.
So what if a school super scores the ACT or something like that? Will they not super score it if one has the essay and one doesn't?
No, the essay is a separate grade. Okay, so you don't get, that's not incorporated into that 4-score super score.
So if they're going to super score, they can send in everything and they'll just look at some.
Right, I'm going to talk about kind of new developments, what's going on with the super scoring. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so the ACT score is on a scale of 1 to 36. Basically, a 1 is that students showed up to the exam. A 36 is close to a perfect paper. Each sub-exam gets a different scoring, and then it's averaged to get a singular overall score. Okay, so let's say we had Moira's recent exam scores with these four scores. Our average is 23.5. They round up to the nearest whole integer. We're 23.25. We round down to 23. Okay? So it's very, very straightforward. And basically, every section is the number of questions you get right scaled. Okay? So the first thing I tell every student when they're working with me or anyone on my team is answer every question. Okay? Don't leave anything out. There are 6 exam administrations that are in New York State. July is a new administration, started this past summer. It's not offered in New York State though. So if you want to take it, a couple of words of advice. 1, register early because those spots book very quickly. You can go to New Jersey, you can go to Connecticut to take the exam out of state. Okay. The exam design is a multiple choice test. Okay, there are 4 choices per section. The math is the only one that has 5 choices per section. There's no guessing penalty, so as I said, you can answer every question. There are over 200 questions that the student needs to answer. So it's 75 English questions, 60 math, 40 reading, 40 writing. So it's a lot of work. The math exam, you are allowed a calculator. Another accommodation is on the science portion where there is no calculator allowed. If you have a student that does have a documented learning difference where they are allowed access to a 4-function calculator all the time, they might be able to get a calculator for that part of the exam. Okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about the different subtests. This will all be posted. If anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to email me. Okay. The first subtest is always English, and it's 75 questions broken up into paragraphs. So what your students doing in these instances is they're playing editor. They're looking for grammatical correctness. They're looking for word usage, organization of paragraphs. So everything that they've been doing in the high school and the middle school level is kind of being tested here. Okay. So we're looking at grammar, word choice, organization, effectiveness of transitions in paragraphs. Okay, again, skills your kids have been learning since probably 6th grade. The math on this test is a 60-question exam. It's a 1-hour test. If you have extended time, it can be anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours. They're testing largely algebra, algebra 1, and geometry. So about 80% of the tests are those 3 disciplines. So again, when a lot of students come to our office and parents say, my child is not in algebra 2 yet, or he just started it, look how little the exam is Algebra 2 and Trig, 20%, but also a lot of what we call Algebra 1 in New York State is really Algebra 2 level material. So by the time your child's in 11th grade, they'll will have been able to answer probably about 90% of the test, okay? The third subtest is a reading test. It's kind of what your students have been seeing on ELA exams since they were in 2nd grade, okay? The 4 passages always in the same order: a fiction passage, a social science, a humanities, and a science passage. There are 10 questions in every single passage. Every passage is between 700 and 900 words. So you're reading 3,600 words in passages alone in a 35-minute time frame. So think about that as about 10 pages of reading. So it's quite a bit. Again, they're questions that your students are used to seeing: main idea, inference, what does this suggest, what does this imply, what does this vocabulary word mean, pick out the details, that sort of stuff. The last test is scientific reasoning. So if your student has taken at least one Regents level exam at the building level, they'll be pretty comfortable with the way this is tested. So this is tested in passages, so it's not a fact-based exam. It's a reasoning exam. So you're given some data, you have to kind of synthesize the data and explain what it means, okay? About 10 to 15% of the questions are knowledge-based, but it's pretty basic stuff, like what would be the formula of a simple sugar, what's the difference between a plant wall and a cell wall, those sort of things. Everything is tested: Earth and space, biological and physical science. You know, I know a lot of kids that really don't take Earth science, and people get unnerved when they see Earth science. But again, all the information is in the passage, so if you know how to read data and figure out information, there's no problem there. Same thing, if your child does not take in physics, same thing. It's graphs, it's data. So all the information is there, and that's what we do. We train our students to learn how to sniff out the data and get the right answers quickly and efficiently. There are 3 different types of passage types. Most of them are data and research summaries. Research summaries is a fancy way of saying an experiment. Data representations: here's a chart, here's a graph, what does it mean? Conflicting viewpoints is evidence-based reading. So you see that also in the SAT. What does that mean? That we're looking at different hypotheses that, let's say, 2 students or 3 students or 3 scientists are talking about. So they love in these passages to give questions about the atmosphere, global warming, and dinosaurs. Those are the 3 biggies, okay? So if your child liked Danny and the dinosaur, they will love this. Okay. So this is how the ACT company requires that a child get accommodations. First of all, you register for the exam, okay, and you'll be asked for the accommodations that are needed, okay? The ACT website shows every possible combination of accommodations, and you know through your IEP or through your 504 what your child is eligible to receive. You'll get an email, and there's a consent to release information form. Your guidance counselor works with you to do this, okay? You don't work with your tutor, you don't work with the principal, you don't work on your own. The guidance counselor handles everything. So you want to make sure this is a sense of urgency for your guidance counselor. The accommodations take about 2 weeks to process, and again, it matches what your IEP states. So if your child gets time and a half for exams, let's say, they're not going to get triple time for the ACT. Okay. Same thing if they're going to a psychic evaluation all of a sudden in 11th grade and have suddenly all of a sudden a language-based learning disability comes up. Well, how come this has never been documented before? And the AC and the SE are cracking down tremendously on these kind of sudden, brand new learning differences in 11th grade. Okay, this is interesting. There are 3 new products that the ACT is coming out with in 2020. The reason they're doing this, I think, is because they had gained considerable market share from the SAT a few years ago when the SAT redesigned, and then they lost their market share. The first thing is what's called section retesting, and this is going to start in September. So as long as the student's taken one full administration of the ACT, they can do computer-based version of any sections they need to retake. So let's say, for instance, your child takes the ACT in June, does a score that works for them, let's say in 3 of the 4 sections, and the 4th section was not as robust as they want it to be, they could register and take that one section, but it's a computer-based exam, it's not paper and pencil. That's the only difference, okay? There will be some online testing. Okay, so instead of taking a paper and pencil exam, which most of the students do, there will be some online facilities. I don't know if Greeley is going to be one of them. But unlike the GRE or the GMAT where you go to a separate testing center, so far from what I've heard, it's not good. This is not going to be the case for the ACT. Super scoring, someone asked about this. Does everyone know what super scoring means? Let's talk about it, okay? Super scoring means the following. You're going to hear this word a lot in the next few years as your child goes through high school and starts visiting schools. It means that kids usually take the SAT or the ACT more than once. So what happens is the schools will capture the high watermark grade in every single section, and they'll call that your child's SAT or ACT score. So for instance, let's say that your child took the ACT, let's say they scored 25 in 3 of the sections and a 19 in the 4th section. And then the second go around, they scored 25 in those same 3 sections. Let's say 25, 25, a 24 in one, and a 28 in the other section. Their score would be 25, 25, 28, and 27. Okay, so it would be the highest scores in every single section.
Oh, it's the highest score in every single section. It's not the composite score that's
It's the highest per section, and then that becomes a new composite grade. Okay, so what we're seeing is a number of schools will say we'll super score the SAT, we will not super score the ACT. Some schools do both. What the ACT is now going to start doing is they're going to allow students to super score the ACT at the ACT level and send that score to the universities. So it's going to be kind of interesting what happens for those kids who are rising seniors, how this is all going to play out.
Do you have any Do you have any information about how that section retesting is going to work? If like the student's a senior and wants to take this September section retesting, how soon they're going to be getting it back in order?
I think it's going to be within 2 or 3 days. It's pretty quick.
Because with the accommodations, it's been taking longer. That's
Right. They were saying because it's computerized, it'll take much less time.
So they're actually going to take it on a computer. They're not doing it with paper.
Yeah.
What about if they have an accommodation not to take it with computer?
That's a good question. I don't know. I can find out.
I don't even know if that's an accommodation option.
And Alan, do you think the SAT is going to go to the retesting and online testing?
That's a good question. I bet in time, they tend to try to piggyback each other, so if one does one thing, the other does something else as well. So I think that could very well happen. So like for instance, in order to graduate from high schools in various states, you need to show proficiency from the on an ACT exam. What the SAT did was they started selling the SAT to different states. I think Illinois was one of the states. If you're a New York City resident and your child goes to a public high school, they can take one administration of the SAT for free. And it's not income-based, so if you live on Fifth Avenue or you live, in a homeless shelter, every single kid who's a New York City public high school student gets to take the SAT once for free.
And the retesting is available in June, you said?
September.
Oh, September.
Okay, prepping for the ACT resources, what to expect. These are just some recommendations, okay? There are a lot of free online resources, so plenty of free tests online. The ACT does something called the ACT Question of the Day. It's an app-based product. I recommend doing it. I mean, you can even do it with your kids also. So you get 1 or 2 questions a day sent to your phone. You do the question, you track yourself, you track your friends, all that stuff. These are 2 books that I really like that I work with students. The Real ACT Prep Guide and the 5-Pound Book of ACT Practice Problems. And it's literally 5 pounds. It's a book like this. There are also some other books I started liking. There's a series for the verbal. The author's name is Erica Meltzer. Her books are fantastic. I've gotten really nice results from my students having used those books. There's group tutoring, okay? Group tutoring is your typical 15 kids in class. They come once a week for 3 hours. We do test prep. We do some in-class exams, graded homework, practice exams in the class. The pros about that is a lot of contact time for not a lot of money. The cons are that the luck of the draw. The class makeup is the luck of the draw. You can have very high-end students, you can have a mix of students. So again, with those, it's a crapshoot. I recommend, especially if it's affordable, for a student who has learning differences, private tutoring, because then somebody, myself, another company, could custom make a program for your child. So that's kind of, and I really think basically the model, what I've seen in the last about 15 years, we're going more and more to an individualized model. When I started creating my company about 13 years ago, we did mostly group classes. Now we're seeing that students and parents want more of the private tutoring than the group classes. Okay, so how do you create a plan? Okay, so I always recommend that sophomores take some sort of diagnostic either in May or June. Okay, what I like to do is give students a practice SAT, a practice ACT, see how the two scores look, see what the students felt about the two exams, and then we create a testing plan from there. Okay, I usually start preparation mid-junior year. I start summer after 10th grade only for students who, when they do their diagnostic, the scores are off the charts, and the kid is basically ready to go pretty much immediately. Now, I've had students who, they came in, they did diagnostic, they blew it out of the water, we did some summer prep, their score was unbelievable. They were done by October of their junior year, but that's more the exception than the rule. I also say don't start any test prep at the beginning of 11th grade. There's too much going on, okay? My feeling is 11th grade academics ramp up dramatically. Your kids have just come off from summer, so they backpedaled a little bit. So I think to add the combination of test prep plus the new academics, it's sensory overload. So I say wait a little while, let them get used to 11th grade. If they're on a team, usually team sports end like late October, get it all over with, and then start test prep in earnest. I usually kind of say a 10 to 12 week lead time before a test. Again, it's like this, we cover any contingencies. Student gets sick, snow day, vacation, all that good stuff. Summer before 12th grade is a great time to do that last minute preparation. So if your child does need to retake a test or needs to retake a section of the exam, they do at that point in time. So now this new ACT rather, I'm predicting I have a number of students who are saying, I only want to bone up for the math or for the reading, whatever have you, and we'll do some very targeted tutoring for those students.
Alan, can I mention something?
Sure.
I'm an 11th grader, so I had the same schedule in place for mine, and I had a big star on my calendar for May. That's when you should hear from guidance telling you how to apply for accommodations. So if you haven't heard from them by the early, first week or two of May, start rattling your guidance counselor's chain, and it's usually a form you fill out for the SAT, and again, the ACT is more complicated, but just to think about.
Right, so just again, stay in touch with the guidance counselor through the end of 10th grade, so make sure that your child is on your guidance counselor's radar screen for this. Okay, the SAT, okay? So for those who took the SAT in the 70s or the 80s like I did, the test is completely different now, okay? There are no more of those quantitative comparison questions. You don't have to memorize lists and lists of vocab. There are no more analogies. That's all gone, okay? So, and also there's no more guessing penalties. You don't have to sit and think while you're taking the test, should I answer this, should I not answer this? What if I answer and I get it wrong? All done, okay? One of the reasons they did that is they found that really this guessing penalty created more anxiety, and also it was to be consistent with the ACT. Also, they found with psychometric testing that they did not have to have 5 choices for every question. 4 was plenty, okay? There are 2 scores, a 1600 scale like what we did in the 70s and 80s. For a while there was a 2400 scale. That went away. There's not a lot of vocab memorization. There's a lot of contextual vocabulary. So the more your child reads, the better off they are because they'll be exposed to more words. There's reading in disciplines throughout the curriculum, so what you're going to see is reading in mathematics, reading in social sciences, reading in fiction. Personally, I like the reading on the SAT better. I think it's more interesting, it's more relevant. And it looks more like what your kids are reading in high school, what they're going to read in college. There's more comprehensive testing in mathematics on this test than there was on the old SAT, because they're doing a few basic topics in Algebra 2, but not that much. There's still an optional essay. Again, the same thing. Ask your colleges and universities what their policies with respect to the essay.
Ellen, can I just ask you a question
Sure.
about SAT? Because you had mentioned that the ACT has quite a bit of inferencing. Is there as much inferencing on the SAT?
There is. There is inferencing. We'll talk about like the differences in terms of some of the types of questions. But basically, the test is 3 hours if you're taking it standard time. So if you have 50%, actually about 4.5 hours. Double time, 6 hours, then you take it over multiple days. So this is a summary of everything I talked about. Move right along. Okay. I'm going to talk about each section kind of little by little. The first section is always reading. The reading test is 1 hour and 5 minutes long, so it's a lot longer than the reading on the ACT. So there are 5 passages you need to get through. One of them is called a paired passage. So it's 2 different passages. One complements the other. Just to figure out the structure of why they're put together that way. Passages can call from U.S. and world literature, history and social studies, and science. There's also some primary reading. So you might be reading the Emancipation Proclamation, the Communist Manifesto. Excuse me. So those sort of direct readings that are expected to be done at the college level are on this test. Reading includes graphics. And a word of advice I tell every parent and child: read the Science Times of the New York Times, because you see a lot of that sort of stuff in the Times. You see newspapers, Time Magazine, they always include a graphic about an article. It's a great thing to kind of have a conversation with your child about what they've read. The vocab is very contextual based, so it can have different shades of meaning. So like the word want, okay, think, I want a bicycle, okay, a desire. But it can also mean for want of, for lack of. So knowing the way that this is structured is important. So what we do in our practice is we do require the kids to acquire some vocabulary. We want them to use Latin roots. We want them to understand some cognates. So the more they know, the better off they are. Okay. This exam has about 3,300 words of reading. So that's a lot of reading. If your child is not a reader, that could be a bit of an issue. But I keep saying that I find the reading very relevant. It's more interesting than the ACT reading. Again, my opinion. The writing and language test has another 1,700 words of reading. So that's about 5,000 words just from those 2 areas alone. So it is a reading intensive exam, just like when your child goes to college, they're going to be doing a lot of reading their first 2 years. So it's the same thing. Okay, the math readings I'm going to talk about, they did something very different on the SAT. I'm wondering if the ACT is going to follow suit one day. They created what's called a no calculator section. So it's about the same number of questions as there were on the old SAT, but split up. Okay, so the no calculator section kind of, they want to see your students' ability to manipulate algebra, to be able to interpret equations, to be able to solve basic linear equations, to do some guesstimations, those sort of things. Okay, and again, those are skills that are relevant for any time in your life. So like you're doing a back of the envelope estimate of your budget every single month, same thing. Most of this exam, that's 62% of it, is Algebra 1, okay, and skills that they've learned in pre-algebra. So working with ratios, rates, percents, exponents. Advanced math, they consider things like quadratic formulas, absolute values, square root. So nothing that's really untoward. So they're not going to ask the questions of pre-calculus, honors level sort of thing. There's no calculus on this test. There's very basic trigonometry that your children will have learned in their geometry course. Okay. If your child doesn't like geometry, the good news about this exam, the geometry is very de-emphasized here. Okay, the ACT is much more geometry heavy. Okay. The calculator section is a lot more interpretive. So use, again, figuring out data and comparing pieces of data, understand what a standard deviation is, those sort of things that maybe they have not seen. Again, any good tutor will teach the students that. I have to teach my students standard deviation. It's not taught in most high school math courses. Okay, so what's required for accommodations for the SAT? A child must have a documented disability. It just can't be, I don't like taking standardized tests. It has to be documented. Okay, the accommodations are necessary. So in other words, this is something for them to function at the building level. They're received at in-school exams. So if your child is getting a separate location, if they're getting a stop the clock, those sort of things, those again will be replicated at the SAT. Again, you need to work with your guidance counselor to obtain these accommodations. You can't work with your psychologist or your neurologist. They can provide input, but again, they're not the ones making the recommendation. The guidance counselor is the one. These take about 7 weeks to get, but once you get an accommodation, it's covered for every exam that the College Board administers. So whether it's the SAT, the PSAT, excuse me, AP exam subject tests, you're covered. Now another thing to understand, I know I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself, but when your child is taking, if your child is going to take the GREs or the GMATs or the LSATs one day, again, they do accommodate, okay? Same thing with the MCATs, but they will not accommodate for things like internships or residencies. So your child's not going to get time and a half to do surgery, so those sort of things. But they will get for testing.